Hello, and welcome to the Sheldrake Vernon dialogues with myself, Mark Vernon, and Rupert Sheldrake. Hi, Rupert.
Hello, Mark.
So these are dialogues where we get together and we talk about things that we've been thinking about or experiencing, reading around. And the idea is they're very much open-ended dialogues. We put some ideas, to each other, see where it goes in our conversation, which is spontaneous. It's going to happen right now. And the idea is that that's productive for people listening, and that they may have their own thoughts, their own discussions and so on as well. So please do share them around and distribute them on your own networks as well. That'd be just great. We're very happy about that. So Rupert, today I wondered if we might talk about subtle bodies. I've used the sort of the more Eastern term, but it's an idea that has different terms in different places. But maybe the etheric body, or I feel it's connected to your morphogenetic fields as well somehow. So, and as a psychotherapist, I think one of the things which we're doing is trying to engage with the subtle body, subtle energies. And I thought it'd be really interesting to talk around it and see kind of what sense we can make of that whole area. Partly, actually, I've been getting into it because, I had this great interest in Owen Barfield, the Inkling. I've been writing about him a lot. And he was very influenced by Rudolf Steiner, the founder, the German philosopher stroke mystic. Although, interestingly, Steiner didn't like the word mystic. He preferred the word esotericist because he precisely felt the task is to really see what's implicit, the esoteric, rather than the mystic who he felt has astonishing experiences and has a felt sense of the oneness of things, perhaps. But he wanted very much to develop a way of almost step by step being able to move into the implicit world, much like empirical science can move step by step into the material world. So I've been grappling with Steiner. I'm sort of unclear about Steiner still, but nonetheless, what he called the etheric body, as well as other implicit bodies like the astral body, is really central to him. So I'm partly interested just to sort of tease some of that out as well. I mean, what's the sort of first thought before I say more?
Well, I think that how I interpret it is my starting point for interpreting it is Aristotle's idea of the soul. Aristotle and then St. Thomas Aquinas following him had what is the traditional Western idea of the soul, that the soul has three aspects. There's the vegetative soul, which shapes the body. Plants have vegetative souls. Each species of plant, say a foxglove, has a foxglove soul, and that soul is the form of the body, as Aquinas put it. So that's what shapes the foxglove as it grows. It's the formal cause, in Aristotle's sense, of the shape of the foxglove. And then animals have vegetative souls too, which are what shape the growth of an embryo and maintain the form of the body, underlie wound healing, regeneration, and so on. Now that is what I would call now, in modern scientific parlance, a morphogenetic field, a form-shaping field. These fields shape and organize the material systems within them, the processes. My own hypothesis is that they have a memory and that they will do it by modifying the probabilities of quantum processes, so they make them more likely to take up this form than another one. There's always an indeterminism, and they pattern the indeterminism in developing organisms to create this form. So there's the morphogenetic field, or the vegetative soul, which is what I think Steiner calls the etheric body. I take it to be more or less what he's saying by the word etheric body. And then, according to Aristotle, animals have the animal soul, and of course the word animal comes from the word anima, meaning soul. And the animal soul underlies their instincts, their sensations, their movements. It coordinates behavior, learning and behavior. And we also have the animal soul. It gives us our animal instincts, things like anger, fear, lust, greed, hunger. Well, not perhaps greed, but thirst, hunger. I mean, these are things we share with animals and are part of our animal nature. And then Aristotle thought, and Aquinas thought, that humans also have an intellectual or rational soul, which is to do with thought, consciousness, and so on, and that is the part that's open to the divine spirit, the Spirit of God. So, with the mechanistic revolution in science in the 17th century, Descartes and his followers abolished all souls from nature, including the vegetative and the animal souls. So animals and plants became machines with no organizing principles except the laws of nature and mechanical forces. And the human intellectual soul was left as an immaterial spirit, creating a kind of dualism between spirit and matter, and religion and science, and humans and other animals, which is what we're left with today, and which is why we have such a problem dealing with a word like soul. So, you see, I think that when Steiner talks of the etheric body, he means what I think he means is something like the vegetative soul or the morphogenetic field. When he talks of the he then has another kind of soul. Does he call it the astral?
So the astral, the astral body.
The astral body. Well, the astral body I see as more related to the animal soul, which is to do with the coordination of movement and behaviour. And I think it's also related to the dream body that we experience in our dreams, because we all have another body in our dreams. When I'm lying asleep in bed and I'm dreaming, in my dreams I'm walking around, I'm talking to people, I'm sometimes flying. And this body I have in my dreams is not the same as my physical body. And we all have a dream body. Everyone dreams. And animals dream too, so they probably have dream bodies as well. Dogs dream. They must have a dog dream body. And so I'd think of that as the astral body. And I think that's the same body that's involved in out-of-the-body experiences, where people find themselves travelling out of their body, or in near-death experiences when people find themselves floating out of their body, looking down on the body from above, and then going to another realm, and then coming back. So I see that as the what Steiner would call the astral body. I see it as the dream body. And I personally prefer the term dream body because everyone knows what a dream body is because they've experienced it, whereas astral sounds esoteric, and he wanted to sound esoteric, but actually I think in modern terms it's rather off-putting to sound esoteric.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that. I think the terms they take your mind in the wrong direction, really. And to some people they're off-putting, to other people I just think they're slightly confusing. And the notion of dream body does make sense. I mean, but the schema, I think, does chime in quite a surprising variety of ways. So, for example, one of the things which persuaded me that Lorna Byrne, who's a woman that I've been reading around too, who sees angels, one of the reasons that persuaded me that she sees something for real is that her way of describing angels too maps onto Aristotle's schema about souls and causes. So, for example, in one of her books she says that all plants of a certain species share the same angel. And immediately I thought, well, that's exactly what Aristotle said about plant souls, whereas animals, then it sort of diversifies and we diversify a step further. So I wonder whether another word that people actually do use now is angels. And, for example, the huge growth of the idea that particularly when a young child dies, people see it turn into an angel or talk about the child having turned into an angel. I suspect that this is a way of somehow sensing that the astral stroke dream body, but now thought of as an angel, is perceived to be still around somehow, and that the material body and the etheric body, which was, the kind of the vegetative life, as it were, and the lowest, most sort of primitive sense of this worldly life, is what gets left behind. When you start getting in, part of the reason I was interested in subtle bodies is that when you start to try and work out what's actually meant by these terms, it resonates in a very surprising way across, even just in the West, picking up on Aristotle or picking up on more New Age ideas, like the serious people engage with angels. Yeah, I mean, and I even thought, I've even wondered whether notions like panpsychism, coming from more speculative areas of science these days, are trying to reach in this direction somehow. You know, so we've talked about panpsychism before, but it's broadly the idea that some kind of consciousness is actually associated with even the most basic units of matter, as science just talks about it, like electrons and so on. And whilst the idea that electron has consciousness feels a bit too clumsy, maybe what they're trying to say is that electrons have a kind of formal causation around them, to use the Aristotelian term, or the etheric body. Steiner was quite clear that minerality too has its own sort of way of being in the world, so it has its own kind of etheric body too. And I do wonder whether, although most scientists, I'm sure, who talk about panpsychism would never resort to phrases like the etheric body, that's kind of what they're looking for as well, actually. That they're trying to get a sense that whilst you can look at the material world through material eyes, there's this sense that it's not quite enough just to look at it in that way. And a bit like the old rabbit duck trick, you know, you can look at exactly the same thing but in a very different way, and a different dimension of things springs into view. And so panpsychism too can be grouped into this area, trying to get to grips with the etheric, and then the dream body and morphogenetic fields perhaps as well.
Well, yes, I think what's happened in science, and what helps us perhaps understand these things better, is the way that what used to be called souls are now called fields. People in the Platonic philosophy and in the Middle Ages, many of them thought that the whole universe had a soul, the anima mundi, the soul of the universe. We now call it the universal field. The gravitational field of Einstein, for example, contains all things, like the universal soul did. I mean, the universal soul went further than the gravitational field. But the idea of a field which includes the whole universe is not unlike the idea of a soul that encloses the whole universe. So then the idea, they also thought in ancient Greece and in the Middle Ages that the magnets had souls to explain their influence at a distance and influence on each other. And again, that was replaced by the idea of a field, a magnetic field. The vegetative soul of Aristotle in the 1920s changed into the morphogenetic field. So I think when we look at quantum phenomena, the wave-particle so-called duality, the wave aspect is within the field, and the fields of quantum particles are describable in terms of probabilities. I mean, the Schrödinger wave equation gives you probabilities, which are possibilities, and possibilities are not the same as actualities. They're not the same, they're potentialities. They're the things that an electron could do, not what it actually does do. As soon as it does something, it's a measurable fact. And as Whitehead pointed out, all matter is now seen as a process, and it's a process which has a future pole, which is not yet determined or decided. It's a field of possibility. And as soon as something happens, as soon as one of the possibilities is actualized, it becomes a fact, but it's now in the past, and new possibilities open up. So I think that the idea of a morphogenetic field fits actually with quantum fields and with the organizing fields of molecules and crystals.
Just to pick you up on that, because I always get a bit nervous when quantum physics is resorted to, because it's the ontology of quantum physics, as you know better than I do, is still completely undecided in science. But would this be, what you're talking about there, would that be the David Bohm interpretation of quantum physics, where there's a kind of subtle field around a particle, say, that carries its probability? Is it that reading of quantum physics that you'd appeal to there?
I think so, but the point is that standard quantum field theory, I mean, this is central. It's not some speculative add-on. I mean, quantum theory central to it is quantum field theory, which says that an electron is a vibration in what? It's an energetic vibration in an electron field. The electron field is the underlying reality within which the vibration occurs. So doesn't rely on David Bohm. The idea of quantum matter fields is absolutely central to quantum field theory. And quantum matter fields are fields which organize the different particles of matter. There's a proton field, an electron field, a neutron field, and so on. And these particles are vibrations within the fields. And where the vibration will go next is the quantum potential. It's what he called the quantum potential, but all quantum theory has the idea there's an openness in the future as to where it will go next. Bohm differed from regular quantum theory in saying that the quantum potential is something you can sort of map out, and an electron will go down one path in this quantum potential rather than another. The normal theory would say the quantum potential is just a potential, and it can do one thing rather than another, but it's rather a subtle difference, and it doesn't make any difference to what you can actually measure.
So would the quantum world map onto what people call soul, though? I suppose that's the other concern I have, because of course the quantum world is at the world of the very, very, very small, which
yes.
Neither you or I can perceive, but nonetheless we would claim to be able to perceive effects of soul fields. So would there be a difference there?
Well, I think it's more like the vegetative soul. I mean, when people nowadays talk of the soul, they're usually thinking of survival of bodily death, and which would be more to do with the dream body rather than the etheric body in Steiner's terms, which is the morphogenetic field. So, an atom has a morphogenetic field, a molecule has a shape, a form. And I think that protein folding, for example, is shaped by a morphogenetic field and depends on morphic resonance. And a crystal has a morphogenetic field. Now, whether they have a dream body, I wouldn't think they do. I mean, Aristotle and Aquinas didn't think that plants had dream bodies. They thought they had what Steiner calls etheric bodies or vegetative souls. I mean, the bit where people get interested from their own experience point of view is the dream body, not the etheric body. And I think the etheric body, or the morphogenetic field of the body, is something, again, that's actually that we can make more understandable by thinking about phenomena like phantom limbs. I think that when someone's had an amputation and has a phantom limb, and almost all amputees do have phantom limbs, they feel the limb is still there, even though it's not materially real. I think what they're doing is feeling the etheric body of that limb or the morphogenetic field of the limb. And so there again, this is a field of just part of the body, but the dream body is when in our dreams an entire body detaches from the normal physical body, or seems to detach. That's what we subjectively experience. I don't think morphogenetic fields detach in dreams. I doubt if plants have dreams. And I have a slight problem with calling these angels, because for most people, angels summon up the image of humanoid figures with wings in stained glass windows. And the Findhorn people called them Devas. Each plant species has its Deva. You could say that each of them has its sort of protective, or a kind of intelligence or spirit, which is to do with creativity. Most of the etheric body, or the morphogenetic field, is about habits. My whole idea of morphic resonance is a habit theory. And plants and animals and us, and crystals and molecules are all creatures of habit. The vast majority of our mental life is habitual and unconscious. The conscious bit is a small minority of our mental life. And if it's a small minority in us, I would expect it to be an even smaller minority in plants, or most species of animals, or crystals, or molecules.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you about the word angel. It's as much used as a result of our confusion about these things these days as anything else. But I just was wondering whether that's partly what people are sort of sensing and trying to reach after. But whilst we're looking for sort of analogues to try and connect this with our experience, rather than it just being sort of strange esoteric ideas, I mean, there's a couple of other areas where I wonder where people reach into the etheric and maybe even the dream body or the astral body, to use Steiner's terms. And one area would be mathematics, because if you talk to mathematicians or read mathematicians, they very much describe maths as an intuitive process, that, as it were, the wellspring of maths is trying to peer with the mind's eye into a kind of world, a mathematical world, which is a bit like, kind of looking around an implicit landscape, and that different kinds of maths or different formalisms within maths, different, as it were, bits of maths, seem to have a kind of life within the mathematical world as a whole. So it starts to look like quite a kind of a living landscape that's perceived intuitively. And then, people do the proofs and the logic and the consistency and so on, all that kind of other work to see what stands up and what doesn't. I'm not denying that. But it is a kind of abductive process. And I do feel that to be a good mathematician, you have to have almost gone through a kind of initiation in order to be able to see this world. And it interests me too, because in psychotherapy, there is a strand of psychotherapy that has tried to model the unconscious on mathematical principles. So this is particularly associated with a psychotherapist called Matti Blanco. And he, for example, took set theory and tried to understand how, as you sink through different levels of the unconscious, it's a bit like sinking through different levels of sets. And so, for example, to try and unpack it a bit, he talked about how deep levels of the unconscious are like infinite sets. And one of the properties of infinite sets is that you can have subsets that are infinite within the whole set that's also infinite. So, for example, the subset of even numbers out of all the natural numbers is itself infinite, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, it goes on forever. But it's still a subset of another infinite set, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that goes on forever as well. And this property of infinite sets and their infinite subsets, really interested him because he noticed that, for example, human beings will say things like, all my love, to one person, and then they'll say all my love to another person. And at a kind of rational level, that doesn't really make much sense, because if you've given all your love to one person, you can't then give all your love to another person. But if love, as it were, exists in this different domain, or comes from this different domain, you can give all your love to one person, a bit like you can have all the infinite even numbers, and then give all your love to another person, because as it were, you're giving another infinite set of love, maybe the odd numbers by the analogy, if that makes sense. So it's a bit tentative, but sometimes I do think, goodness me, whilst at one level they're talking about very different language, maths, what's that got to do with love and the unconscious and feelings for people? Certainly people have tried to use them, at the very least, as kind of analogies to understand how we're engaged with an implicit aspect of life. I guess it would map more onto maybe the astral body / dream body level of things, connected with the divine in this case, rather than the vegetative / etheric body, which is the more habit side. But that's maybe why maths can be used to describe the etheric vegetative aspect of things, as it were, because it's not actually of that body. It comes from another dimension of reality, so it can be used as a tool to describe that aspect of reality. So that the other thing where the analogy speaks to me is, I think one of the things which you try to do when you become a psychotherapist is develop a kind of inner eye that can perceive these aspects of people's life. You partly say look at body language, but what you're really trying to see is what we would call the unconscious. That's normally the language which is used in psychotherapy. But in a way, it's like the etheric aspect, perhaps, which would be the habitual side of the human psyche, the human soul, that perhaps is very closely connected with the body, and often actually you can help people perceive this side of their being by saying, look, I wonder if you go to the heart or to your stomach, or maybe even to your legs or hands, and talk about this sense of things that you have as if from that part of yourself, then often people suddenly see a whole different side of their problem. It's called body psychotherapy for that very reason. So that feels like speaking to the etheric level. But then, of course, in psychotherapy, you can also talk about dreams. Or you can talk about maybe the more volitional, the will, the more directed side of things. And that feels like it's addressing things at the dream body level or the astral body level. And that too can be brought into the discussion in psychotherapy. And the experience as a psychotherapist often is as if you're with your mind's eye, sort of exploring these different levels of people's being in the psychotherapy process. And because, as it were, as a psychotherapist, you've learnt not just to see, but also to trust these aspects of existence more, you can help someone see it for themselves. That's often how psychotherapy feels.
Yes, well, I mean, that's a lot of ideas. I think, I personally don't think the maths analogy is terribly helpful, because traditionally the realm of mathematics has been thought of in a Platonic way, as a transcendent realm of ideas beyond space and time. That's how Pythagoras thought of it, and he influenced Plato, and it's actually how most modern mathematicians think of it. They think there's an objective world out there, an intellectual world of mathematical forms which are beyond space and time. Some of them are quite explicit. Roger Penrose, for example, at Oxford, in one of his books, actually says that when you discover a new mathematical principle or theorem, you're actually discovering something that's already there in this realm. And when you communicate it to someone else, even though you can only use symbols and inadequate marks on blackboards and things, then there's a point when they suddenly get it, and it's as if that window's opened for them and they've seen that eternal truth, as it were, in the mathematical realm. Well, that's very different from the way that an evolutionary universe works, where I think that these are more like archetypes in the sense of Jung. They're habits, they depend on memory. And of course, within the philosophy of maths, there's the alternative school of thought is that maths isn't an eternal realm of truths out there. It's a man-made system of structures, forms, or habits of thought. And we may pick them up from other people by morphic resonance rather than from a Platonic realm. I mean, that would be my interpretation of some of his experience.
Yeah. I mean, just to leap in there, I mean, I don't think Plato thought that maths exists in an eternal realm. This is a modern use of the word Platonic. Plato was very, very clear that anything that is discursive or logical isn't eternal because it's changing. It's not in the noetic space, to use his word. It's in the discursive space. But because I think in the modern world we've lost touch with the noetic, eternal in our direct experience, as it were. Someone like Roger Penrose pushes mathematics into that kind of vacuum, and so confuses mathematics, which I agree with you, exists with much more within the habitual space. It has a kind of life to it, I think, mathematics. It does sort of live. It's not changeless, in fact.
No.
So I think that's more confusion about what Plato was saying rather than anything else.
But it's nevertheless a very predominant confusion among mathematicians and theoretical physicists.
Yeah,
Many of them are Platonists in that sense, in this perhaps confused sense.
Yeah.
So I think that your second point about mathematics providing a model of a kind of nested hierarchy, again, I don't think we need to go to maths to get that. I mean, everything in nature is a nested hierarchy. The Earth's in the solar system's in the galaxy, a cell's in a tissue's in an organ, and organ's in an organism. We can see them everywhere we look. An atom's in a molecule, the molecule's in a crystal. Everywhere you look, there's these levels that contain lower levels within them. Fields within fields, if one wants to put it in field terminology. The field of the crystal organises the fields of the molecules, and that organises the fields of the atoms in particular patterns. And I would think the psyche does work like that. But I personally would find a mathematical metaphor a bit confusing.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it's not a good one, yeah. But I do basically agree that the nested model, as it were, much as you directly see it in the material world for empirical means, the idea that souls, different kinds of subtle body, to take us back to the beginning, would be nested as well, makes complete sense.
Yes.
And also makes sense that when we think about the different qualities of being, that distinguish plants from animals, and then animals from, well, let's say at least humans, maybe other animals as well, that have self-awareness of various kinds, for example.
Yes.
Or maybe can use primitive kinds of language. It's certainly clear that if you move from being a plant to using a language, you're engaged with a very different notion of reality, and the idea that there's nested souls, nested bodies,
and nesting
that.
in language too, phonemes in words, and words in sentences, and sentences in phrases in sentences, sentences in paragraphs.
Yeah.
Language too reflects this nested structure, which actually we see in all nature and in all thought.
So what would be, where in a way the leading edge for me in this is, how can we see these different subtle bodies in the immaterial world, as it were, with the mind's eye? How can we come to appreciate with them and distinguish their influence upon us, their being too, much like people can distinguish different levels of reality in science. Whether it be from the quantum level to more macro levels and so on. And, I feel that there are the esotericists like Steiner who said that this is a schema. I mean, Steiner writes, anthroposophists themselves do regard him, I think, as a new Aristotelian, a new Aristotle. They say that he, as it were, laid out a schema that was quite as sophisticated as Aristotle's Four Causes. So that's why they sort of champion him so much. His time will come, they say. That in a way remains to be seen. But nonetheless, the basic principle that one can train oneself to become attuned to different levels of being in the esoteric world, much like the scientist, as it were, looks down the microscope to tune to one level, or looks up the telescope to tune to another level of being, I think it is a really powerful one. So maybe that's a good place to draw.
Yes,
to a conclusion.
inconclusive, but this is a huge topic.
Yeah,
I'm glad that we've at least begun to explore it.
Yeah, well, thanks very much.
Thank you.